Okay, everybody, so it's Cat Stanley Space Demon coming at you again. And today I want to talk about the musical rivalry between Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley of Kiss, and the time that they lambasted each other's 1978 Kiss solo album. Okay, so when people think of Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons, they think of the partnership which was the foundation of Hall of Fame hard rock band Kiss. The visionaries who had the idea to create the band no one had ever seen before, to not only be a sonic assault on the ears with their thunderous rock and roll music, but a feast for the eyes as well, with a spectacular stage show featuring explosions, fire breathing, blood spitting, smoking guitars, levitating drums, heads a-bobbing and asses shaking, with 4 identifiable characters and elaborate makeup designs and costumes that you either thought were shocking for its time or outright comical if you were a detractor. The Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley brotherhood lasted for over a half a century, surviving the groupies, drug-addicted band members, car crashes, high-profile celebrity relationships, failed film careers, cosmetic surgery, shady management, ripping them off, and reality television. You'd think that for a partnership to transcend all of those kinds of trials and tribulations over the years, that it couldn't be anything less than rock solid, with the 2 parties involved being in total lockstep along the way. A rock and roll match made in heaven. But this is far from the case. And even though the pair managed to keep up the appearance for many years that all was hunky-dory with the Kiss Brain Trust, that was not the case. In fact, the pair couldn't have been more different. Gene Simmons was the outspoken one, who never hesitated to let you know his opinion, whose main goals in life were making money and bedding down as many women as humanly possible. Paul Stanley was the sensitive one, who chose his words a bit more carefully in interviews, who, in spite of all the preening and rock star posing, deep down all he ever really wanted was a successful marriage with a happy family, 2 cats, a dog, a goldfish, and a white picket fence. But interestingly enough, when the time came to write tell-all books in regards to each other, the roles seemed to reverse. When Gene released his tell-all memoir, Kiss and Make Up, in 2001, he had nothing but glowing praise for his partner Paul Stanley, with nary a negative word to say about him. Stanley, on the other hand, held nothing back regarding Gene in his 2014 autobiography, Face the Music, where he revealed his true feelings for his partner, the Demon, and it was mostly less than glowing. The topics that Paul covered in that memoir included, but weren't limited to, Gene Simmons' endless self-promotion, putting his own interests before that of the band's, his complete lack of discernment with regards to the women he slept with, saying basically he would F anything that moved, the fact that Gene went MIA from Kiss to go make movies, basically leaving Paul with his dick in his hands to try and see to it that the band carried on in his absence, Gene's purported business acumen, which Paul would repudiate adamantly, along with Gene's disdain for the institution of marriage, the sanctity of which Paul believed in wholeheartedly. This would lead to the fact that Paul wouldn't invite Gene to his wedding, the kinds of things that were never made public in the past. Kiss was very guarded about the private inner workings of the band, and now, for the first time, the Kiss Army would be privy to just how contentious their partnership had been over the years. But today, I want to focus on the Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley musical rivalry. It's not something I think that gets talked about that much. Of course, Paul has written about how he was the one who held the band together in the 1980s when Gene was off doing his acting thing, appearing in movies. He slagged off Gene's musical contributions from that period, basically saying his songs from that time are forgotten now. So I want to go back to 1978 when Kiss made their solo albums. It was around the filming of Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park that the band got the idea to do solo albums. Of course, Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park was the NBC TV movie in which the band played superheroes. It was a campy, silly kind of a movie that's become a cult classic with Kiss fans. But lead guitarist Ace Frehley and Peter Criss had a miserable time during the making of that film. They'd felt the band were straying too far from their rock and roll roots with all the toys, the movies, and the marketing. And Ace was seriously considering leaving the band. So in order to appease Ace, they came up with the idea for each individual band member to record a solo album, and they'd all be released the same day, September 18th, 1978. Of course, Ace's solo album would be the most commercially successful of the four on the strength of the hit single, New York Groove. It was also the rockingest, the closest to the style of rock and roll Kiss were known for at that point. But let's get to Gene and Paul's solo records. Gene's solo album was very eclectic. It had fewer rockers. He embraced his Beatle influence, and he even did a cover of When You Wish Upon a Star. He also brought in a host of celebrity guest stars, including Joe Perry from Aerosmith, Bob Seger, folk singer Janis Ian, Helen Reddy of I Am Woman fame. He also wanted to bring in John Lennon and Paul McCartney, but he had to settle for a couple of guys from Beatlemania instead. But Paul Stanley's album was closer to what Kiss were doing at the time, with some softer things, some poppier things. But here's what Paul Stanley had to say about Gene Simmons' 1978 Kiss solo album back in 2003. I think a danger with Gene sometimes is that he may get more involved with the packaging or the impression something gives than what's really there. A cast of thousands isn't gonna make much difference. I mean, what have you got? Forget about a list of 30 celebs. I think he may have gotten caught up in that presentation instead of really writing his best songs. I think he can write much better than the stuff on that album. If 5 is the best, I'd give that one a 2. So here he's saying Gene Simmons' solo album, on a scale of 1 to 5 stars, he's only giving it 2 stars, which would be like a 4 out of a 10. So basically he's lambasting his record, saying that he got too many people involved, he wasn't writing his best songs, yada yada yada. 2 out of 5. Here's what Gene Simmons had to say about Paul Stanley's 1978 solo album. Paul's solo album was a lot closer to the Kiss thing, but the solo record I enjoyed most was Ace's. I thought that had a lot more rock and roll spirit, and I liked the guitars on it. When Paul sticks to the harder edged lyric, I like it more, but there's a lot of stuff on there that's love this and love that, wouldn't you like to know me, hold me, touch me kind of stuff. When Paul starts to get romantic, I turn off. But as a rock and roller, you can't touch him. So as long as he stays hard, it works for me. When he gets soft, I miss you, I love you. I go, you're spineless, get out. 2 stars. So here Gene says, basically, Paul's solo record lacked balls. He got a little spineless. He was going with the lovey-dovey, hold me, touch me type of stuff. And he thinks Paul's better when he does the balls out rock on Kiss records. And he thought his record was 2 out of 5. They both gave each other's record 2 out of 5, which would be 4 out of 10. And they basically lambasted each other's solo album. So there's the musical rivalry coming out between Gene and Paul. Didn't have great things to say about either one's solo record because, God forbid, one guy would praise one guy and the other guy would lambaste the other guy. So they figured, well, let's cover our ass. I'm going to talk shit about his record because he's probably going to talk shit about mine because we're musical rivals, even though we managed to keep it under wraps for so many years until Paul Stanley blew the lid off of everything, blew the lid off of their relationship in his 2014 memoir, where he basically talked shit about Gene Simmons nonstop when he wasn't slagging off Ace Frehley and Peter Criss, Michael Bolton, and half the fucking world he's got a beef with. But that's the video. Let me know what you think. Do you think Gene and Paul have a big musical rivalry? Or do you think they're just telling it like it is? Like Howard Cosell. As always, hope you dug the video, and we'll see you next time.
Who's here?